Okay, we're going to get started with Q&A. Before we jump into that, excuse me, I'd like to remind you to fill out your evaluation forms, please. Again, you can get to those on the event site through the eval tab. Please take a moment to fill those out, and then we'll have a raffle drawing after the Q&A concludes. Got a couple of the IR staff coming down the aisles here with mics, so go ahead and just raise your hands when you have a question, and we'll call them out and try to get to as many as possible.
Can we get the lights
Yeah.
turned on? I mean, I know this.
Down. Yeah.
Bill and I decided we didn't like this room today. I like it a little better when we can see your faces at least, so let's have the lights on. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead with number one over here, please.
With your focus on integration and your success in the server market, could you give us your thoughts on getting into the enterprise applications market?
I think we've been pretty clear. I hope Doug was clear today. We're enthusiastic about what we're doing in Microsoft Business Solutions. We've had a clear design goal to focus in on small companies on up through mid-market and maybe what I might call smaller enterprises. And we think that that's a right design point for us. There is a higher end design point that would require a product that looks a little different than the product we have today. But we choose not to focus in on that part of the market. And I think that works. Partnership with SAP, partnership with Siebel, with PeopleSoft, partnership with Oracle is probably a little harder, but we'll see what happens.
Another question? Down here. You guys could raise your hands high so these guys can see you and get a mic to you in time.
You've made a number of strategic investments in the past, but one of the areas that you've recently indicated was particularly important to you, yet I didn't see anything in terms of investments, was the healthcare vertical. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little about that, as well as I've heard that Bill tends to say financial leverage begins with architectural consistency. And so now that .NET's been around for a while and there are applications vendors beginning to provide somewhat more mature products to the marketplace, can you talk a little about some of the areas where you're seeing some early success on that platform with some of the ISVs?
I'm not sure I understood the second part of the question. Let me try with the first, and if one of the other guys did, they can take the second part. First part of the question, I think healthcare is an interesting market, and the key for us is to make sure that we take our platform at the highest level that's appropriate and put it in the hands of good independent software vendors who can tailor it for market. We did form a healthcare vertical organization formally this year, or this last few months, on a go-forward basis. I think that'll be an important part of our activity. We hope to have the kind of extensibility in our Microsoft Business Solutions product line that people can write healthcare-specific applications using that as a foundation. Certainly, it's well known that the healthcare part of the economy is one of the biggest, and I might add, one of the least automated. So over time, could well provide good opportunities. I don't see us doing specific vertical applications, though, ourselves.
One thing that's pretty hot in that area is the idea of the portable tablet device. The large screen size and the mobility has strengthened the work we're doing with the ISVs, where you take patient records and are able to move those around, as well as the requirement now for these digital patient records is forcing an upgrade to those systems. So, I think we've got a broad set of design wins. I'd say .NET is particularly strong in that vertical. We can get you the information, but off the top of my head, no.
I would go to Microsoft.com, punch healthcare, and you'll see a full list. The fact of the matter is, most of the ISVs in that space are much smaller. It's not like there's one. I mean, people say, well, what about SMS? The new SMS. What about Cerner? Those guys are important. We have some pretty good traction, but most, take patient information handling. They're not really front and center in most of the scenarios Bill described.
go over here with number 3, please.
A question about corporate adoption, the rate of adopting, particularly in Windows on the client and Office. We're clearly in the middle of a big product roadmap, and yet the value that businesses realize depends on their willingness to accept your new scenarios and deploy them. How do you measure, particularly as corporates get on subscription agreements, how do you measure whether they're enjoying the fruits of all of your constructed scenarios? And how do you measure the rate at which companies are taking you up on the new scenarios? Just looking around the room here, most of our big businesses seem to be a couple of revs back, if not more, even if we own the software, which we may under an enterprise. So trying to keep it crisp, how do you drive the adoption of the new scenarios, and how do you measure how you're doing it, helping customers realize the value of the new scenarios that you're building?
Now, one of the critical objectives we gave our field in the last 6 months is to really make sure they understand and drive deployment, not just purchase. And so we are literally currently in the process of asking all, at least in our larger accounts where we tend to have the highest percentage of subscription agreements, to systematically detail what the deployment rate is or what the deployment situation is for various releases of the operating system. It's not statistical because they won't let us instrument their networks at this stage. It's not 100% automated, but we're going to watch that, drive that. We put in place these business productivity advisors last year, about 400 folks whose #1 job is to help show the kinds of new value that large accounts and smaller accounts can get out of deploying the new software. So we have a keen focus in on it, and we're building at least our own internal reported measurement on that. Just a small show of hands, because there's a lot of laptops I noticed open, which is a great thing. How many of you are running Windows XP on the laptops in front of you? And how many people are running Windows 98? Windows 2000? Okay, so maybe what we have here is probably 40, 60, something like that, which at least I like the deployment rate. The deployment rate in here is not perfect, but it's not that bad either.
But say for Bank of America, the account team's job is to know where you guys are at in terms of contract, in terms of desktops covered, in terms of versions that are running, and it isn't automated and instrumented yet. But each account team, particularly for large accounts, they know where we're at.
Well, anybody who uses SMS, the SMS inventory function, delivers that, and we're getting, and we certainly have a strategic goal to get very high penetration of SMS. Another thing that I found fascinating is Office 2003, the latest version here, as we get that shipped, it's got built in a logging feature, which we call SQM, that tracks exactly how Office is being used. And so a corporation can roll that up, and we give them tools to look at it and say, okay, what kind of Outlook performance are they getting? How many applications are people building in these things? Anything they want to know, that information is there. And then our BPA advisor steps in and can say, okay, your network, you ought to look at the reliability, or you ought to look at some of these real-time things that your people are using less than other people in your vertical industry segment. So that ongoing relationship that's part of this systems assurance is something that we're driving value into.
Okay, let's go with #1, please.
With regard to R&D, how do you guys determine what the right level is? And once you determine that, how do you go back and then determine what the return on that investment has been?
Well, there's sort of two sides, so I'll give you both sides. First thing we do is we have a sense of how many people we can hire. That's probably the #1 ceiling, frankly, because there's always plenty of other things people want to do. #2, we're not irresponsible. We do take something of a view of what we can afford, although the things that tend to get cut tend to be on the sales and marketing side more than they tend to be on the R&D side. And then that sort of all gets rolled together with the business groups and Bill and his staff's enthusiasm for new ideas. And particularly on acquisitions, where you can essentially get a lot of people quite quickly, then we kind of munge it all up and move forward. There aren't many things that we think I can think of that we haven't funded where we actually thought we could execute well and there'd be an opportunity when we got through it. I don't know if you want to add.
No, that's fair. You can say our success has given us a little bit of luxury in this area, that we go to the product groups and insist that they have a lot of incubation activity, and we review the incubation activity, make sure that it's at quite a level, that they're doing risky things, some of which don't get past the incubation stage. The things that are particularly risky are done in the research environment, where we don't even have particular time frames or product shipments that the technology gets into. Amazingly, I can actually explain exactly why we have every headcount in MSR, even somewhat better than in the product groups. That is, the product groups, what they're doing is the right thing, but we need to drive more efficiency into that. Whereas in the research activity, we understand the efficiency equation very well, and we've gotten an immense amount out of that.
And in fact, the largest, on a percent basis, I think, the largest growth group in terms of R&D will actually be research this year.
Right.
Let's go to number 2.
How do you position Jupyter into the ISV product roadmap, and how are you positioning it sort of in conjunction with Windows Server and VS.NET? And then theoretically, how would that dovetail into Longhorn down the road?
I think the Jupyter concept, because it's not a product yet, it's a concept. I think the Jupyter concept is a concept that really is tailored at large enterprise customers more than it is individual ISVs. And I think as we continue to refine both our Windows Server plans as well as our Jupyter plans, we may find that some of the technologies that we pioneer in Jupyter will become more a part of the base Windows Server fabric in order to be more of a real platform for the independent software vendor, for whom it's hard to say, yeah, I'll take another higher priced item and make it a fundamental part of my product definition. There's probably, Bill talked about workflow, I think, a little bit earlier today. There are elements, sort of a basic level of workflow that probably ought to be available to ISVs, not just available in the higher end SKU, as an example.
And we're able to take subset runtimes like we did with SQL Server and price them very aggressively for ISV usage. And so you'll see the key parts of the things in Jupyter, we will find a way to make it attractive to ISVs, particularly in the workflow engine orchestration space, because that's in the process of moving to be part of the platform itself.
Number 3, please.
Could you tell me how you're going to sell more Xboxes in Japan? And secondly, can you give me more of an idea what sort of a direction you want to go in the antivirus market, please?
I guess I'll do Xbox in Japan. We think there is, right now what we have in Japan is a small, niche market. Happy customers, but small, niche market. And we're going to try to build off that base of customers and their profile. A lot of them also would own a PlayStation, for example. They like some of the unique games that are on our environment. And we're going to push on that. I'm not sure, in the next few years, we will characterize us as being a very large player in the Japanese market, but certainly we will be larger than we are today. We did bring on board a new vice president to oversee the international operations for Xbox, a fellow named Peter Moore, who we're very excited about. I think Robbie may have mentioned him in his conversation earlier today. He's taking care of not only Japan, but also Europe, and he's doing some things to enhance our developer relations and the team in Japan. And I think we understand that that'll be a market that is a tough one, where we're going to have to work on it for a number of years. Second part was antivirus, and maybe I'll let you do that one if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, we've offered antivirus capability to customers under certain OEM arrangements with vendors in the past. MSN has done that, as have one or two other groups. We also now have an antivirus group that's part of Microsoft. And so as we're refining our software assurance offerings and consumer subscription offerings, and as we're enhancing that technology to a new generation that goes beyond how people have thought about it, we will find a way to get that to our customers primarily through subscription type offerings.
And I think you ought to think what we care about is that our customers have the best security experience in the world. We've decided we need more capability, and we will grow kind of, if you will, the footprint of our offer. But we know it'll continue to need to be complemented. We'll want to see it complemented by offers from others. So we're in pretty good dialogue with guys like Symantec and NAI, et cetera.
Let's go with number 1 over here, please.
Can you elaborate on how Microsoft views its total cost of ownership of less than Linux, and how you position that in competitive situations and with customers and getting them to see those cost arguments?
Well, I did the brief form, and I probably won't do the long riff, but if you step back and you say, look, let's see what the independent research organizations see as cost. There's not only the cost of acquisition, there's the cost of deployment, there's the cost of ongoing operation, there's the cost of other value-added software, transaction software, middleware, blah, 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 that you'd want to add on top of it that comes fully included as the price in the basic price of the Windows product. If you take a look at that, you get the kind of results, and you can go through with customers quantitatively. Okay, here's the acquisition cost differential where Windows servers say $500 roughly, but what about this, 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 what about this? And that's how you get to the kind of delta that we see in terms of total cost of operation, both at the client, total cost of ownership, both at the client and the server. And you just walk customers through that stuff systematically. Sometimes that's very effective. Sometimes it still can be problematic if a customer sees a very easy migration. The place where we have the toughest time is when customer thinks it's easier to migrate an application they already have on Unix to Linux than our stuff. Now, we've had good success migrating some customers, but there are still cases where either the reality is or the customer's belief is it's easier to migrate to Linux. And we continue to work from an R&D perspective on our technology to facilitate those things, and we're continuing to work on our ability to articulate the cost of migrations.
Let's go to number 2 here, please.
Yes, 2 questions. One is, how long will it take to get all of the business solutions products on a single platform, .NET? And also, how important is that to gain share in that fragmented market? Separately, on the subject of India, how much do you plan to use that going forward? And what can it be used for and what can't it be used for? Thanks.
Sure. The companies that we acquired to build up Microsoft Business Solutions were companies that were extremely good users of Microsoft technology. So, for example, the way that Great Plains used our platform, the way Navision used our platform. And so they already have extensibility capabilities that use .NET. They're already exposing web services. There's a fairly big generational upgrade to our applications platform that comes in the Longhorn timeframe, and that goes a step further, in fact, taking advantage of the new things that are being developed in parallel with it. But we already view those as a very strong showcase of the .NET runtime.
Yeah, in terms of India, we've had a presence there for some time with a sales subsidiary and a research and development site. We also have there some call center, product support, and internal IT application work that are Microsoft employees. The majority of the work that is in India was done previously by vendors, but I think India, China, Eastern Europe have a large number of very talented technology workers as well as computer scientists. And you would expect, like us, like others, as being global companies, to have a larger presence there. And I think all companies, including us, benefit as those economies grow and more people reach middle class. So R&D, there is some internal IT development and call center and support, and you'd expect to see that grow.
And the R&D centers, I think, 150, something like that, people now. And we can see 100, 150, roughly.
Yeah.
We can see maybe doubling, tripling that over the next few years, but we're not sort of envisioning that gets to be 10,000 people over the course of the next several years. I think we will be able to make more use of resources in India, both our own folks as well as vendors in the areas that other areas that John highlighted than we will see in R&D. And we'll try some other experimentation to see where that goes. We have a great research facility in China. Great research facility in China, and that we do continue to grow as we grow Microsoft Research.
Number 3 over here, please.
Thanks. 2 questions. On the porting topic, John, could you talk about how much money is being invested in that SFU product or related products? And then secondly, Steve or Bill, could you talk about the applications market, particularly the high end? Orlando was quoted a couple weeks back to the effect of, we're coming up market and we're on a collision course, which seemed to run counter to some of the comments you've had in the past. Could you just give us a sense what your intention is there? Thanks.
Somebody else should take the SFU question, because I can't remember what that's an acronym for.
That's okay. SFU is our Unix emulation capability. And so it's exactly what Steve was talking about, where we can say to a corporation that's got, say, Solaris systems, hey, move down to Windows, and you don't need to do much work with your applications, because we have all of the shell capability, utilities, and API capabilities that you'd have up on the Solaris system. And we have a lot of great design wins. That's another thing that's well documented on the website. The team that does the bulk of that work is in India. And I'd say there's probably 70 or 80 people there. We also, as part of our license with Santa Cruz operation, not only got the intellectual property rights to make that emulation layer clear and free, and part of the indemnity that we provide to our Windows customers, we also got the SEO source code to charge up that effort and go even faster in saying that, yes, we provide the Unix capabilities, but we also provide Windows, which has a lot of things better than that.
In terms of the second question you asked, everybody wants some black and white answer. We have a design center that starts with smaller and mid-sized companies, but we're going to sell our product to as big companies as can productively use it. SAP has a design center that's big, large enterprises. And they're going to sell their product line to companies that can productively use it, as small as they get. There is an overlap. There is an overlap space. I think that overlap space represents a very small percentage of their revenue and not a very big percentage of our current revenue. And that market is very fragmented. That's where you've seen more of J.D. Edwards and a lot of other people. So there will be an area of some overlap, but our design center for our development is quite different than their design center. And that's why the two companies continue to have a very, very productive partnership, even though we know they're coming after us in small and mid-market, and they know we're coming up a little bit, but still a very productive type of partnership.
Great. Scott, did you have a question?
Yeah, Linux is clearly top of mind today, but how do you think the Linux open source movement will play out over the next 4 or 5 years? You've seen other operating systems kind of come and go.
Why don't you take it?
Well, I think that Linux is Unix. I mean, it's a form of Unix. It's not like anybody invented a new way of doing an operating system. It's like FreeBSD was, and that existed even 10 years ago. The open source approach is valuable for certain types of development. We've always seen software coming out of the universities that prototype various things, and was part of the ecosystem of our industry, that was there and used, and people would, if the licensing model allowed it, if it was actually an open license, which the open source license is not open, because you can't take it and ever use it in a job creating activity. Anyway, people did take those things, and there was kind of equilibrium between what came out of that and what was done on a commercial basis. I don't think that's going away. There is a class of innovation having to do with management, security, natural user interface that goes beyond what Unix has delivered that we are driving forward. And it's like designing a 747 or a moonshot where there's a lot of integrated activity, the design, the testing, the pieces that come together, getting a version of Office that fully exploits those things. And our innovation needs to remind people that what they expect out of an operating system isn't standing still. And so there's an onus on us that if it's still 1970s Unix is all people expect, then we'll share more of the space with that kind of approach than if we're revolutionizing and getting a whole new level of expectation. We were able to do that in things like word processing and spreadsheet. We're in the process of doing it in categories like database and collaboration. So over the next 4 or 5 years, that's why we've taken the road of pouring on the R&D, taking advantage of the hiring environment we've got today and driving things upwards. In the next 4 or 5 years, people will understand some of the IP questions that get raised about those systems, and is there some sort of patent pool that people are paying royalties into, how that all plays out so that customers don't feel like they have this open-ended liability for something that comes without that indemnification. I don't have an exact prediction for that, but that's certainly going to put some notion of rights and friction into that side of the system.
Just want one thing comment about, which is, look, we like lots of customers. We're going to invest to have lots of customers. And Bill said, well, we have a larger, a bigger piece, a smaller piece. We're going to prioritize having as big a piece as we can have based upon what we offer to customers. And there may be occasionally some friction between that and revenue and profit enhancement. Will we include more value instead of trying to price something separately from time to time to have a rich, sort of a more valuable offer as opposed to doing something that might look like it had greater revenue optimization short term? Expect that kind of decision process around here. People said, hey, look, are you really, we're doing some things to try to really reach out, particularly in poorer countries, to make sure that our products are getting used by folks in education, and you'll hear more about that. Well, that can't be done at the same kind of prices that people might expect in other environments. So I'm trying to emphasize, we're prioritizing having lots of customers, and when I talked about balanced goals, that may trade off sometimes with short-term business growth.
Number one, please.
Right now, it seems like there's a land grab for sort of the VAR and reseller channel, and also some of the smaller ISVs as some of the larger infrastructure players move down for growth. You've traditionally held a very large share of that market. How do you plan to protect that, particularly when on the ISV side, and to some extent you're competing increasingly with your ISV customers? And my second question is, could you give us a little bit more details on your dynamic systems initiative and what that could mean down the road?
Maybe I'll take the first, and I'll let Bill have a second. We're investing to try to drive. We have a good, as you say, good strong position amongst the small and medium, the VARs that serve small and medium businesses. That has been a stronghold. The ISVs that serve those companies. And there's really sort of three things we're doing. One, John talked about a set of investments we're making to dial up our activity directed at small and medium customers. Most of that, frankly, is going into enhancements to the programs that we have in place for our partners. So that's number one. Number two, particularly for the software developers amongst that community, we are building a set of new programs and support mechanisms that we think will be very important, not just around Windows and SQL Server, but also around the Microsoft Business Solutions product set itself, because as Bill said, that stuff has been built around .NET. It is extensible, and we think a lot of those ISVs it's a win-win. Instead of looking at us as a new competitive threat, looking at us as a source of opportunity to do the vertical applications, et cetera, that come on top and not reinvent the wheel as much down at the base. So that would be probably the second thing I'd highlight. And the third thing is we're trying to crank up our number of customer ads with Microsoft Business Solutions, because in some senses, the more success we have, the more it becomes a train, a piece of infrastructure that other ISVs absolutely want to add on value on top of.
On Dynamic Systems Initiative, this is the idea that instead of humans having to set up systems and track which systems are more loaded or what problems are with systems, that instead you would have a piece of software that's operating across all the different systems, whether it's in the data center or across the desktops or across all the data centers in a corporation. That software would understand exactly what your goals are in terms of getting tasks run and providing a certain responsiveness, and therefore allocate the hardware resources in a very dynamic way. This initiative is it's a very exciting thing. Our research group started this work about 4 years ago in an initiative they called Billions of Interacting Gizmos, saying that if you had billions of gizmos, you could never buy operators to manage them. So let's design it so that it can work without operators at all. And we've actually shipped the base platform for that with Windows Server 2003. And now we have some add-on management software that will come in and use those hooks to do exactly this kind of dynamic provisioning. The work here involves modeling what the hardware is. It involves modeling what the applications are. It's a huge piece of R&D, and we are making really quite rapid progress on it. It's a pure software problem. It's not a hardware problem. Interestingly enough, some of the other companies, more hardware-oriented companies, like IBM talks about it as autonomous computing, or Sun as N1. We feel that the roadmap we've got, the way we've got it integrated into the tools, will actually make that vision a reality far more rapidly than anyone else can.
Let's go with number 2, please.
I just wanted to follow up on an issue you touched on with Scott's question, and that's the IP issue on Linux. I'd be curious whether you're seeing customers where this is actually starting to sway decisions, the uncertainty right now, and as people begin to focus on this as an issue, particularly on patents, where Microsoft is protected in some degree by the cross-licensing. I'm not sure Linux has that kind of protection of cross-licensing of patents, and is this just the beginning, do you think, for Linux of these kinds of issues? And it's not clear to me how those get resolved.
I'm going to make a one-sentence comment about the customer reaction, then let Bill really answer the rest of the question. I think we've seen the average sort of person on the IT floor of any of our customers absolutely knows there's issues around this. They don't understand them, but they know there are issues primarily because of the SCO IBM lawsuit. So I'd say that. I think in terms of really understanding anything about the details of the risks, you now have some analyst groups that are sort of explaining their view of what this might mean, not just SCO IBM, but more broadly the patents and IP issue. But it's still not a very well-developed understanding that I think I see in our customers. But maybe it makes sense for Bill to spend a minute and give an explanation of how we see things.
Yeah, a little bit of background on this. In the technology field, the larger companies invest very substantial amounts, not only in R&D, but also in getting patents that reflect that R&D. So a company like Microsoft, last year we applied for 1,500 patents, and that's a number that's been going up at a pretty steep ramp. The number you actually see disclosed lags that by an increasing amount. It's about 3.5 years now, but it'll probably go up to more like 4.5 years because of the application process in the U.S. Patent Office. And so there's a huge investment in the R&D and in getting the patents. So you might say, well, why hasn't the technology industry devolved into thousands of patent lawsuits where Microsoft's, who's IBM, or vice versa, relative to this innovation. The companies that are really doing R&D and are serious about it have, by and large, there are exceptions, by and large entered into types of cross-license agreements. And so, for example, IBM and Microsoft did a cross-license agreement, I think, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Longer.
Long time ago.
I think 89 or 90.
When we were small. And, and so, that works well. Linux is not covered by most of these patent cross licenses. So, for example, when we license somebody, we cover their commercial products, not the non-commercial products. And so, by and large, the main place you've seen patent lawsuits have been companies that are not participants in the industries, but rather sort of a lone inventor type activity. And because there's so much prior art, often those things end up not creating a liability for the company. Here where you have a product that's not, it doesn't have an R&D contribution, it's not participating in these cross licenses. Given the breadth of functionality, you'd expect a very high percentage of companies in the IT business would have patents that would read on the functionality in that product. And so it's a new thing. One thing to understand about the GPL is you can't just partially license. Somebody can't go and just license IBM Linux or Red Hat Linux. The way the GPL works, if you license at all, you have to license all. And that means essentially getting nothing in return. That's the only way that can be covered, is basically for you to decide just to give that piece away.
The GPL being the
GPL, yeah.
The license for
the unusual license that is the one that has the word open because it's not open is called the GPL. And so anyway, the whole IP thing is just beginning to get attention because it's not a scenario that existed in the past.
Let's go with number one up there.
A couple of questions. How concerned are you that some of your intellectual property may in fact end up in some open source products? And how closely are you looking at that? And then as a follow-up, you are one of the few out there who has access, obviously, to SCO's source code. You can obviously look and see what the Linux source code looks like. In terms of your investigations, could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of a code that looks like it was directly taken from SCO? And then as a totally separate question to John, with respect to your comments on decline sequentially in deferred revenue next quarter, if my recollection serves me correctly, I thought that in the September quarter a year ago, about half your increase in deferred revenue was associated with ELAs, about half associated with the older licensing. So I guess I'm a little confused why you would expect your deferred revenue line to decline so significantly sequentially.
How do you guys want to answer?
No, I'll take the first part.
Yeah.
I'll take the second.
Yeah, I'll take the third.
Well, okay. Certainly, there's no question that particularly in some of the more cloning type activities, intellectual property from many, many companies, including Microsoft, is being used in open source software. I mean, it pretty much when people clone things, that often becomes unavoidable. The SEO suit is, we don't really comment on, that's up to SEO to comment on. That's largely related, or there's aspects of it that are unique to them because they relate to trademark and copyright.
And we haven't asked our people to go study through the source code and comment on some lawsuit. We're using the software for the purposes that Bill talked about earlier with SFU.
Yeah, and we do anticipate the unearned balance will tick down in the September quarter from June, in part because that's just the normal seasonality, and we had quite a strong Q4 in the enterprise space and the government space. A year ago, we had the abnormal seasonality in unearned, largely as a function of Upgrade Advantage purchasing ahead of the licensing 6.0 transition, not EA. So we don't have any similar phenomenon this year. So the year-over-year growth rates are really non-comparable due to the licensing 6.0 transition.
Let's go with number 2 up top there, please.
Yeah. Bill talked a little bit about the silos of information as being a real issue for business users, and we've seen a lot of that. Are you thinking that you're going to try to help solve this through driving XML adoption, or are you actually going to try to create products that attach and extract the information from other application software products?
We'll do both of those things. The most popular business intelligence viewing tool is Excel. And we've done some very exciting things in Office 2003 to connect Excel to web services. In our view, that's just the start of making it possible for knowledge workers in enterprise to really know what's going on, which is an unsolved problem, to see sales trends, to budget very easily, to analyze customer feedback data. And so both the Office group and our server platform group, particularly the SQL people, are investing very heavily in tools that extract data, model the data in a simpler way that the user understands, but yet make it so it's mappable back to the very complex tables in the ERP type software. And so you sit and look at sales in a normal way, but if you want to change a forecast or something, you have right through into that infrastructure. So it's a very interesting problem for us. BI has been a sort of modest volume, high price type market. We hope to, as we have with most other knowledge worker things, turn it into a very broad, high volume market with very modest costs per knowledge worker.
The Oracle PeopleSoft situation and how it would affect the industry.
I missed the
our
extent,
view.
Just our view? In a sense, it seems cosmic to us as to you. In a sense, it doesn't, if you actually ask what do we change about our strategy, it doesn't change nearly as much as you might think. We still have to work well with Siebel. We're still going to have the challenge of getting Oracle to do anything with SQL Server. That ain't going to change. PeopleSoft, we don't have that high penetration, so it's not like there's some immediate big thing at risk. We're trying to build our penetration of SQL Server under PeopleSoft, but we don't have that. And we're going to continue to work hard to have relationships with SAP and the variety of vertical app guys in the enterprise space. So it doesn't feel like it changes our strategy all that dramatically, but it's certainly something that everybody in the industry is talking about, thinking about, services companies, software companies, hardware companies, because everybody's not sure what other dislocation might be associated with it.
Let's go with number 3, please.
It seems that just as software has a synergy with Moore's Law, content has synergy with generational increases in bandwidth. In that, it seems that web services is somewhat analogous to object-oriented programming in allowing you to keep up with providing content for bandwidth. With .NET, the success of .NET largely dependent on increases in bandwidth, what do you see as possible solutions to the last mile problem?
I assume that it's not the bandwidth. There is not a bandwidth problem connecting reasonable-sized businesses in the developed world. And also, web services. A lot of what flows across web services is transaction-type information, and that is so small. When you're flowing to a bank, when you're flowing to a retailer, when you have a supply chain, the actual number of bits that are flowing there is so modest, it's unbelievable. And even a dial-up connection is enough for consumer-type scenarios for buying and selling and those things. So the main place you get into a bandwidth problem is presenting multimedia content and making it an always-on connection that's convenient to just go and use versus, say, picking up the phone or the newspaper and doing commerce or information browsing a different way. So we're really big fans of all the new approaches that would drive broadband to be more popular. Getting the DSL guys to do a better job and have a richer offering, working with the cable modem companies to have better offerings. But we don't see that as a real bottleneck in web services adoption. Web services adoption, it's actually more of the security infrastructure, the billing infrastructure, getting people used to these development tools. That's the piece that clearly is happening, but it takes time. And so far, it's mainly the pioneering customers that are now having a positive impact on the rest of the customer base.
And broadband, I mean, let's face it, has been exploding. More in some other countries than in this one. But even in this country, the number of broadband users is growing at a very healthy rate. Really everywhere in the world. You look at places like Korea, Japan, what's happened there, Germany, but even the United States growing quite nicely.
Number one, please.
Yes, a question on the federal government budgets. We are hearing there is some consolidation in number of purchases down to 20 from 250. And some companies have been able to capitalize in federal IT budgets, and some companies have been unable to capitalize on the new purchasing, the way IT budgets are being purchased from the federal government. I was wondering, what are you seeing in IT, federal IT spending budgets? Do you think there'll be some budget flush in end of the October timeframe? Just general color on that space.
Well, I think the U.S. government's a very hard organization to manage, and the appropriate officials are working very hard to try to figure out, not just on IT, but in a variety of senses, where there might be ways to get expenses under control. Certainly, we're a big supplier to the U.S. federal government. We have been for years and years, probably since Windows 2, when the U.S. Air Force was an early adopter of the Windows product. We continue to be a large supplier, and we certainly see the government trying to be smart and appropriate in its purchasing, and we're working very well with the U.S. government on that. I can't tell you what the total IT, I mean, there are people in the U.S. government who will tell you what the total IT budget is, but you can get different people to give you different numbers, frankly. So I'm not sure I'm the right expert to tell you what the real spend is.
And I think our business has been quite good in the U.S. and overseas, and I think in general we've got a very good federal model, both from an account team perspective and a technical support perspective, and because we had this question previously a couple months ago, and our team felt that we're in very good shape with whatever ultimately ends up being the legislation that Congress passes for consolidating purchasing.
Yeah, and if, we'll work with our customers if there are issues and we need to address them, and commercially, we'll address them. So
we did just announce our biggest customer contract ever with
did we?
U.S. Army.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. John's exec sponsor, so double check. Biggest contract we've ever done. Bill highlights.
This gentleman down here had a quick question, if you could state it pretty loudly here.
And just came out this week.
You mentioned that earlier that there's a new layer of CFOs within all the organizations, and it's evident that their charge is not going to be for cost cutting throughout the organization. Could you elaborate on what, in fact, you do expect out of these executives?
I'll speak, and then John can be more specific, but from my perspective, I want somebody who's the voice of finance, thinking through smart business deals, good expenditures, where's the smart use of resources, making sure that the rest of the leadership team is really thinking about where revenue's coming from, where costs are going, cutting costs when costs need to be cut, but you know, we didn't say, oh, we need cost cutters. Let's go put cost cutters. But I expect those people to think intelligently about those businesses financially in about the same way John thinks intelligently about our business overall. And I have to say, John's more of a conscience on making sure we really watch our overall costs and are thinking smart about, you never want to waste money. You want to spend money on the important things. The size of the cost pool is not as important as making sure that every dollar is working hard for the customers, for the shareholders, for somebody. And certainly that would be part of those divisional CFOs. But I want every one of our business leaders to have a partner the way I have a partner in John thinking through the finances of the business.
Yeah, I think if you think about how the company's large today, and we have a number of different diverse businesses, and these guys they've got to build great teams or grow the teams they have. They got to have a great controller. They've got to ensure we have a great control environment. They got to be sure we're doing smart deals, not only when we buy them, but then that we integrate them well. They've got to be very, very effective at planning and strategy. They got to challenge the business people, and we do expect them to be very good at either having on staff or themselves. How do you re-engineer the way we work? How do you re-engineer the way we think? And in general, be very good finance people, but great business people. And they should be growing a whole generation of great business finance people below them. So we've got a broad mandate for them, and I think the folks are up to it.
Number one, please.
Thank you. I have two questions on timing. And the first is with the introduction of the Yukon database. When will it be introduced, and is its introduction independent of your Longhorn initiatives or simultaneous with Longhorn? And then the second question has to deal with legal issues. Can you provide us a roadmap or timeline about what the next big events are for your legal issues, and then what is management's commitment to getting these legal woes behind it?
Why don't you start on the first and then the second? Go from there. The first one. Yukon.
Yeah, right.
Yukon and
Okay,
Longhorn.
Yukon is the code name for the next generation of SQL Server. And that product went into beta recently, and we'd expect to have it out into the marketplace by the end of next year, that is calendar 2004. Some of the Yukon technology, in fact, is contributing to the unified file system called Windows File System, which the acronym is WinFS. So Yukon predates the Longhorn, which there's no formal schedule for Longhorn at this stage, but it comes after, it'd be certainly after Yukon. In terms of legal, we're a big company, and you pick an area, whether it's people who are pirating our software or counterfeiting our software, or patent disputes that arise in the normal course, or things like that. We have a lot of different things. At this point, we've got a lawsuit with Sun that will probably go to trial in 2005. We've got a discussion with the European Union about any concerns they have and how we can get them comfortable with all the ways we offer our products.
Which is their timing.
Yeah, it's totally up to them. We don't control that timing. We have some state-level so-called overcharge lawsuits that we've been able to settle some, and a number that we have not settled, so they have different legal status. And there's a bunch of other lawsuits as well.
I would say, with respect to those, our basic agenda would be to settle matters that can be sensibly settled whenever possible, particularly with governmental authorities. I mean, let's break this into two categories. There's sort of governmental authorities, and there's other plaintiffs. And we're trying to work very constructively on issues. We will go through a litigation process, I guess, when we need to, as evidenced by the long process we went through that eventually led to the consent decree. But I think our desire would be to try to amicably settle those matters. In terms of the private lawsuits, you know, we have to do the thing that's right for our shareholders. And sometimes that'll be to settle, and sometimes that'll be to go through the litigation process. Everything is probably settlable, but not everything on the private side is settlable in some way that is fair to where we are and what's right for our shareholders. Some of these things have no merit. They ought to be litigated. We're prepared to litigate when we need to.
And that's fairly important in the sense that, you know, if you settled everything and management said, oh, we settle everything, then the only thing you could guarantee is that the supply of lawsuits would rise.
Let's go with number 3 up there, please.
A question on migration of value in the platform business. And you've talked, I guess, a couple times in the presentations and Q&A about a notion of Linux and software as a commodity versus Windows as a source of innovation with security and management and new UI and integrated experience. But isn't there a big percentage of activities in like Windows R&D or any platform R&D, like device drivers, bug fixes, where those activities can consume as much as 50 to 70% of the effort, that those are more maintenance activities? And couldn't a community approach apply to that, and the innovation approach apply to the value add, the new stuff on top, where you or someone like an IBM could add value on top of what the community maintains?
But first of all, the last thing somebody at home at night having fun writing software wants to do is maintenance. I mean, if there's anything that the free software model is not good at, it's maintenance. You know, the idea that you take a system that's not working, you diagnose it, you dig into it, you have all these systems to gather the information. If a customer needs a fix within an hour, you get them a fix within an hour. That kind of work, you've got to have commercial relationships where you guarantee those things. When we fix things, we run a massive number of tests. Writing those tests is not the kind of thing that people at home at night get a kick out of saying, you know, I'll just be a test writer. So maintenance is not a huge part of what we do on Windows. You know, the device drivers are largely written by third parties.
In a sense, by a community.
Yeah, by a community of people. HP writes printer drivers. You know, people who do the peripherals write most of the peripheral drivers. NVIDIA writes the graphics driver software. So we're not involved in most of that activity. Most of what we're doing are innovations in the operating system itself. But we have to guarantee that we have teams that are available 24 hours a day to fix things, and that we are watching in this way that, you know, is not exciting, but it's commercially important. We're watching everything that's going on with our system. You know, taking every one of those support calls, taking visits to the website, taking these feedback reports we get called Watson, and digging into those things. And the responsiveness people get out of that, you know, there's all sorts of statistics to show how the commercial model, how well the commercial model does at that.
We'll take our last question, number 2, please.
On the issue of cash balances, first, thank you for the additional disclosure on it. A question on that is, there's been a debate about what to do with cash for some time, and during that period, the cash balances on your balance sheet just continue to grow. How should we interpret that? And if we interpret that as that you don't feel like you've had enough cash, is there a level that you feel is the right amount of cash? Is there a point where you would start returning everything from that point forward?
I want to take this one instead of John, just to give a perspective. We've tried to be very clear that we think there are some risks associated with some things that exist on the legal front and what they might imply and what they might bring. And I simply think it would be imprudent for us to make some kind of, you know, significant change to the strategy on our cash until we resolve those matters. There's no reason to do so. It's not going to enhance shareholder value to make those decisions. the math on this stuff, you guys are all the experts, but Bill and I, we've spent a lot of time just looking at basic math from John that says, look, if you buy back your stock, if you keep the cash, unless your stock's undervalued, you haven't improved shareholder value. Everybody can have their own point of view on what undervalued is. And, if, you know, we showed these buyback numbers. And I don't know, probably somebody's cheering, and I'm sitting there looking and saying, gosh, we bought all that stock at 43. In some year, we had a bunch of stock we bought at 43. And, you know, that didn't create shareholder value. The truth is, the way the math works, keeping $1 in the company versus buying back, if you're buying back whatever the long-term price is, those things are economically equivalent. A dividend is economically equivalent. All these things are about giving flexibility to the shareholders in terms of how they deploy the cash. And so if it takes another N months, and I'm not going to say what N is because I don't know, but if it takes another N months to resolve these issues, what we're trying to tell you is there's nothing, it would be imprudent to change something in our cash strategy now. We're not in any way reducing shareholder value during that period of time by our actions. John tried to be quite clear that we think we're managing that is all of our shareholders' cash responsibly, and we talked about the risky part of the portfolio, which is the so-called strategic part, which was, I forget, $9 billion out of the total of $67 billion that John talked about. We talked about the kind of, you know, you wouldn't say it's the highest risk fund that we manage in terms of our treasury portfolio, but, you know, it's a managed risk, it's a well-managed risk-reward relationship. No matter what we do, we're going to still do some of these strategic deals that take additional risk, no matter what our cash strategy is. So what I tell everybody is, we think it'd be imprudent for the company to be hasty. There's no reason to do that. We're trying to be responsible during the period of time. And yes, there will be a time at which, through one form or another, buyback, dividend, some combination, we will give greater flexibility to our shareholders in terms of how they deploy their cash. But it, you know, John said, "Oh, everybody's going to expect an answer at this meeting." It's not, the money's being well taken care of, and we're going to get through some issues and understand really where we are. And it's the only prudent thing. Certainly, I feel that way not only as a CEO but as a shareholder, perhaps more importantly. And our board certainly agrees on that. Bill agrees on that.
Great. Well, thanks, Bill, Steve, John.
Okay.